Hi everyone. So this week the podcast is coming from an audio recording that I have done for my Substack. Now, Substack is a website, if you haven't heard of it, it's a place that allows writers and journalists to publish newsletters, blogs, articles, etc. So I have recently started writing on Substack. And the content is very similar to what I produce on this podcast, but it's in written form. So if you want to read about the psychology of eating disorders, if you want to read about tips and tricks from the therapy room, if you want to gain understanding and awareness about eating disorders, and you like the written form, you might want to go and check out my Substack, and the link for that is in the bio. Now, every written post that I do for Substack, I'm also going to be recording an audio that accompanies it. So it's almost like a kind of mini bonus podcast episode. So what you're going to be listening to on the podcast today is my 9 tips to help you overcome binge eating and to understand why you're binge eating. This has been produced for Substack, but it is also as a bonus episode here on the podcast. So if you like written form, do go and check out my Substack, and I hope you enjoy this episode. Hello, I'm Harriet Frew, and I write about the psychology of eating disorders. I've personally recovered from bulimia and have worked as a therapist for 20 years. I hope to inspire, educate, and improve understanding about eating disorders through my writing. Names used are fictional, and stories shared are combined insight of many client experiences. I believe that full recovery is possible for everyone. 9 reasons why you're binge eating. So binge eating is not simply scoffing an extra biscuit with your morning coffee break. Instead, it involves eating fast an extremely large amount of food, more than you would eat for lunch or dinner, and it's usually in secret and can feel like a dissociative or out-of-body experiences. Now, you are fully present and grounded on earth, but it can feel as though a demon has swept over you and taken all rational decision-making away. Binge eating can fleetingly bring euphoria and pleasure, but this is short-lived before guilt, shame, and self-loathing descend like a dark cloud. Plus, the physical consequences of feeling overfull are deeply unpleasant and sometimes painful. Now, binge eating can happen across all the different eating disorders and within disordered eating. So this means if you have anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, binge eating disorder, or OSFED, other specified feeding and eating disorder, binges can happen. So why do people binge? Number 1, dietary restriction. So binge eating doesn't usually spring from nowhere. In most cases, overly restrictive eating, dieting, or deprivation around food have happened pre-binge. Now, if you restrict your eating, your human design will drive you towards a huge desire to eat. Your hunger will be ferocious and feel out of control as you're primed for survival to eat following deprivation. And as hunter-gatherers, when we hadn't eaten for several days and then food was available, we would have filled our bellies to the brim. There would be no restraint or holding back. Getting fuel in the tank meant life or death. And we know from the Minnesota starvation study, post-Second World War, that when men were starved of food, men who didn't have eating disorders, at least before the experiment, they became very preoccupied with food, and many started binge eating. So the impact of hunger was described as devastating on mind and body. So restrictive eating will often inevitably lead to binge eating. In today's world, restriction might involve not eating enough food or limiting your calories. It could be not eating enough variety of food, maybe trying to be super healthy and cutting out carbohydrates or gluten or dairy, and then feeling physically and mentally deprived. It could be delaying eating till later in the day so your hunger swallows you up in the evening, and it may be a combination of all 3. In a world where thinness remains highly valued, restrictive eating can feel good and seductive. But the reality is that as you continue to restrict, you're extremely vulnerable to the backlash of binge eating. And this is true for all body types, not just people who are thin or noticeably underweight. Restriction may feel like a honeymoon of self-control and purity, putting your body into a mentally and physically deprived place, but it's not sustainable. So action points. Notice if you're restricting your eating right now. Are you counting calories, missing out food groups, or delaying eating? So work to reduce restrictive eating by eating enough quantity of food, eating regularly, eating from all the food groups, and working not to forbid any foods. And start with baby steps and build slowly out of your comfort zone. Restriction can feel terrifying to let go of. So number 2, you don't prioritize your self-care and regular eating. Now, our culture values productivity and busyness so much. Cramming your day with endless tasks and to-do lists drives satisfaction and self-worth, often to the detriment of well-being and health. So you might be busy all the time. Life feels like an endless to-do list and you find yourself at the bottom of priorities, meeting the demands of everyone else first. So this means that you often skip breakfast. You might grab something on the go for lunch, which doesn't sustain you if you have time to stop at all. Then the evening arrives and you're understandably ravenous, starving and over hungry. So you find that once you start eating, you just cannot stop, and your evenings become a frenzied, out of control haze of numerous trips to the kitchen and endless snacks. This is in response partly to the physiological need of just simply not eating enough all day, and it's partly because you're so exhausted from emotional labour and giving out. There has been no room left to self-care in peaceful and soul-giving ways. Instead, food is the quick fix. It is instant, gratifying and an immediate escape to soothing and peace. So action points from this. Start with baby steps towards implementing self-caring eating through the day. So prioritise your eating as you would if you're feeding a friend, a child or a beloved pet. And think about foods that sustain you and balance your blood sugar. You will then have improved energy, you will feel more resilient and might even have the headspace to squeeze in a bit of non-food self-care later on. So start small, and if your eating is chaotic, build structure gradually. Number 3, sleep. Poor sleep is a trigger for eating with less self-care and attention. It disrupts your hunger hormones and you will naturally crave sugar and carbohydrates. And you will likely lean on these foods to get you through the day when you're weary and exhausted. And this can make you so vulnerable to binge eating. Now, ultimately, when you're so exhausted like this, you don't really need food on these days. You need proper rest and high quality sleep and downtime to recuperate. Now, food can be the shortcut to bursts of energy when you feel you just haven't had time to rest. And if you've got a baby or a young child who isn't sleeping, or if you're going through a really stressful time, food might be that one thing that kind of bridges you through this phase, but it's not ideal for the long term. Sleep is a fundamental need. So action points from this. Going to bed early can feel so unsexy and boring. If you've had a full day full of demands, the evening period offers welcome, respite and personal space. But reflect on your self-care and work to see sleep as an investment and a healer in your food relationship. Number 4, alcohol. Alcohol and binge eating can become firmly intertwined. Now, this was personally a nemesis for me. As a student, I would often drink significant volumes of cider on an empty stomach. Interestingly, allowing liquid calories, which felt much more permissible than other calories. But I would inevitably feel starving after a few drinks. My blood sugar levels crashed to the floor, and I would end up buying takeaways in a drunken stupor, which would signal the start of a humongous binge. Then the next day I'd have a raging hangover. I would feel physically ill and craving binge foods all over again. Physically, it was a roller coaster for my body and an emotional one too. Alcohol absolutely can rocket fuel binge eating and intensify the after impact of self-loathing and self-disgust post-binge. So I remember feeling huge amounts of shame around this. It was a very lonely and secretive struggle. So action points. Get curious about the impact of alcohol on your eating and just reflect on how it's impacting binge eating or not. And think about a baby step to change. Perhaps it's ensuring that you eat before you start drinking. Perhaps you alternate alcohol with soft drinks or water. Good and bad foods, number 5. So if you struggle with binge eating, you will usually possess a mindset around good and bad foods, and this will be played out in the dichotomy between foods eaten during a binge and foods eaten at other times. So you might call them good and bad foods, healthy and unhealthy foods, or non-binge and binge foods, but this is very much part of the problem. Because the bad foods become linked with anxiety, overexcitement. They're seductive and forbidden. So just eating them alone can cause a nervous system response that's anticipatory of binge eating. Your body is flooded with cortisol and adrenaline, you can feel guilt and fear, and you end up binge eating. So over time, the action points here, you need to find a grey area with your eating where all foods can be permitted. Now, this doesn't mean eating donuts all day, but it means letting go of perfectionism and idealism around your eating. Now, I have clients who are embedded in orthorexia and over healthy ideals, and clients who are avoiding carbohydrates or even striving for a carnivore diet in the pursuit of health. So stripping your eating down to limited foods is not sustainable long term. It means that certain foods are put on an unnecessary pedestal of desire. They're dreamt about, longed for, and fantasized over. They will often be the foods that you binge on. So instead, gradually allow a larger variety of foods into your meal repertoire. Do this slowly, just one food at a time if needed, and do it in a structured and supported way so it doesn't feel overwhelming. Years ago, I would have described myself as a self-confessed sugar addict, having to eat every bit of cake, chocolate and cereal in the house on a binge. This is no longer the case, and my cupboard is stocked with an array of all food types. I enjoy them in moderation and peacefully, and I have only arrived at this place through gradual reintroducing and allowing of different foods. Number 6, chasing perfectionism around eating. Now this expands one step further from the good and bad food thinking. The pursuit of a perfect or right way of eating is often central to the problem of binge eating. Many of my clients who binge eat are pursuing some kind of plan that is too strict to sustain over a period of time. Due to diet and wellness culture, there's a plethora of food information available about what you should and shouldn't eat. And this fuels the idea that there's a superior way to address food intake. Although nutrition is important for health, it is just one part of a larger pie. There is incredible value in research and evidence-based nutrition. But what is often missing here is a psychological piece of the puzzle. Intermittent fasting might be helping some people live longer, but what about the significant numbers of people who will start binging, chewing and spitting and exhibiting disordered eating behaviours in response to this unsustainable restriction? This is not life enhancing, it is damaging to mental and physical health. So we need to be including the nuance and relationship with food piece into the wellness picture. So action points. Recognise if you're pursuing perfect eating and think about a more balanced approach to health, including other variables, for example, movement, social aspects, relationships, spirituality and self-care. So number 7, people pleasing. People with eating disorders are generally exemplary at looking after others and putting others before themselves. And whilst it is wonderful to be kind, thoughtful and helpful towards others, it's not so when it comes at a cost to your mental and physical well-being. So binge eating is often a reaction to a build-up of feelings of anger and frustration. You feel that you cannot express these feelings openly to the people around you. You stuff your feelings down with food. You feel selfish or guilty for having your own needs, and you consequently people please again and again. So action points. Instead, work towards allowing your needs into the equation. You don't have to become a selfish monster, but it's about balancing the seesaw to include the needs of others and to balance your needs alongside. And understand that people pleasing is not authentic. If your relationships are based on suppressing your own needs, people are engaging with a fake version of you. Understanding this has helped me significantly in overcoming people pleasing, as authenticity is one of my highest values. Number 8, rebelling against your inner critic. As human beings, no one likes to feel criticised and controlled, not by others and not by our own inner critic either. So you might feel that your inner critic is serving you and helping you strive for the pinnacle of achievement. In reality, you will likely rebel and push back against it. If your inner critic has hard and fast rules about what you should and shouldn't do, you might follow these rules for a while and be the good person. But eventually you'll grow weary of the rules and rebel. The rebellion may fleetingly be freeing and liberating when you binge eat, but subsequently you'll be hard on yourself about the rebellion. And this will lead to further self-sabotage and self-punishment, and likely be eroding to your self-esteem and bring a high degree of self-loathing. So action points. Work towards becoming kinder and self-compassionate. This is far more motivating and enjoyable to navigate on your journey. And you will be kind and compassionate to a friend, child or pet. You deserve to be treated in exactly the same way, so start small. Number 9, catastrophizing setbacks. Now, recovery from binge eating is not linear. It's 1 step forward and 2 steps back. That is normal. If you catastrophize the imperfections of your recovery journey and berate yourself when you veer from the path, you're likely to throw in the towel and feel hopeless. Or use language that catastrophizes the situation, such as, it's a disaster, you're a mess, you failed. You will then feel disappointment and disgust towards your poor self, and this will lead to self-punishing behaviours and a great deal of misery. So, action point. Remember that every setback is a learning experience. Every time you have a blip, you can learn and refine your awareness and understand your triggers. Binge eating is a coping strategy. Be kind to yourself. In the moment, you're reaching for a well-known and safe life raft, albeit maladaptive, in the eye of the storm of stress. You can learn though. You can forgive yourself. You can move on. You have not failed. You're an imperfect human, as we all are, on a journey, and you will get there. So I hope this article has given you some helpful pointers towards understanding your binge eating. And if you want more content like this, you might also want to check out my podcast, The Eating Disorder Therapist. Thanks for listening. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you would like to access the written format content of this audio, do go over to my Substack. And if you want to be accessing additional kind of bonus audio episodes every week, you can go over to my Substack, because I'm going to be recording audio versions of every written article that I publish. And I know for many of us, sometimes audio is so much easier because we can sort of listen on the go, etc. Anyway, so you can subscribe to my Substack, and then you'll get 2 new articles every week, 2 new audios every week. So if you're not following me already on Instagram, do see me at the Eating Disorder Therapist _. And for further support with your relationship with food, do go to the eatingdisordertherapist.co.uk. If you enjoyed this podcast, I'll be so grateful if you follow, rate and review, as it helps it reach so many more listeners. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to sharing another podcast episode with you very soon.